Okay, we have Jacob Harden here for round two. It's been about 18-ish months, and Sam's here as well. Jacob, thanks for coming back on, man.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to primarily chat about this update since we talked last time, and I think the episode was 49, November 2021, if people want to listen to that first. But before we dive into it, if people aren't familiar with you, can you give a little intro and background on yourself?
So my name is Jacob Harden. I am a chiropractor out of Orlando, Florida. I used to do a lot of social media, but haven't in a hot minute. Um, and do some teaching. Rehabilitation's kind of my specialty. And as of right now, I'm also a part-time faculty clinician at Palmer College.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One, why did you decide to go off social media?
Um, Mental health primarily, like lots of burnout, coupled with struggles of the pandemic and life and how all that went. Was actually like just planning to start back up again, and then the whole disc herniation thing happened, and I was like, yeah, I don't want that stressor on my plate right now, because I was having a lot of trouble moving. So that it was just me needing to step back for myself.
So you don't even look at it, or do you go on and check?
Nope. I used to like look and see, where are my numbers at and all that stuff. No, not anymore. I honestly find myself like not even using social media that much anymore. And I would say I'm actually quite a bit happier that I don't use social media. Um, but yeah, it's been like I can't tell you the last time I looked at like a rehab post on social. No offense to you guys. I know you're putting out good content.
Absolutely none taken. Pretty glad to hear that. Yeah. I know I've gone through periods of not to the same level, but similar burnout and struggles. And I did things such as like not entirely leave, but curate my feed to stop perusing as much of the rehab and S&C side of things and explore other things I find interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly keep up with sports on Instagram at this point.
Yeah. I mostly keep up with fun animals
There
like
you
elk videos and mountain goats.
That's wild. I am very similar. I'm trying to cut down my time, and now the algorithm every time I get on, it's just like puppy and dog videos. Even though I don't follow the accounts, these accounts just come in almost as ads, or I don't know how they do it, but it
go.
sucks you in. That was question one. Question two, when did you start doing some of the teaching?
uh, Last fall, sometime last fall, there was a part-time position open at the college, and I felt like that was I've always enjoyed teaching, especially on the rehab side of things, and kind of felt like that was a good way for me to continue to have an impact on the profession. Is kind of go to the source and help students kind of figure out their thought process as they were going through. So I'm currently there 2 days a week doing 10-hour shifts, and getting to kind of float around and work with all the different students on the clinical side.
So did you move or is Palmer have
So
multiple locations?
yeah, well, so Palmer has multiple locations. The location that I actually went to is in Port Orange, Florida, which is just south of Daytona. I currently live north, like just halfway in between there and Orlando. So I live on the north side of Orlando, and so it's a real easy commute for me.
So you're teaching at the school you went to.
Yes, and I won't want to say teaching because I'm not on the academic side. It's more like mentoring. Patients are seen under my license while the students are treating them, and I help guide that process.
Is there much of a difference in what you've noticed there since you left when you were a student versus now?
Yeah, there are some differences. The systems I would say have changed a bit. There's definitely more. there's more focus on active care at this point. We have an entire rehab department now, which we did not have when I was there. We had like a little room, maybe the size of my office here, that would have like, you know, a wall mounted band thing, and some like body blades and stuff that we go up to, and you had to go and find it. And I was doing all my own rehab when I was there. Now we have a really good rehab specific clinician who, you know, has his own interns, and we got a full, you know, suite there that people can go into to get their active care. So that's very different. Obviously, the docs have changed out. We have some younger docs that are there that were just a few years ahead of me. And I think that there's probably just more of an air of people being more aware of the evidence now, which I think social media has probably helped a lot with, just because, you know, with between Twitter and Instagram and all the kind of stuff getting shared, that information is a little more accessible to students than it was necessarily when I was kind of coming through the program.
That all makes sense. The 10-hour shifts, it's your like in student clinic essentially, and okay, got it.
Yeah,
for long days.
Yeah, they're long days, but it works with having a 5-year-old at home.
Yeah, you leave before they wake up. Is that what you're saying?
I wish, but at times, but he's usually up at 6 when I get up.
Got it. Okay. So
Is
let's
he
go.
starting kindergarten soon?
August.
Okay. Yeah. That'll be helpful.
Yeah, that'll be helpful. That's all. That'll be a whole other challenge to embark on.
Let's go for people that are new to your initial story of this onset of sciatica. Maybe we start from when this initially began, and then a little bit of where you were when you had this last conversation about 18 months ago.
Okay.
And then we can dive into kind of those options you ended up choosing for injections and imaging, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I could be a little bit fuzzy on the details, so I'll tell everybody, go back to the first podcast where things were a little bit more recent. And if there's any discrepancies between timelines and whatnot, definitely take whatever I said before as true. So it was, again, timelines somewhere between March and May. I think it was let's just say April of 2021. I've been feeling a little beat up in terms of training. I've been dealing with a lot of back pain kind of every morning for a few months leading up to that point. And I was doing nothing really special. There wasn't really an event necessarily that I could point to where I injured myself. But I was doing some exercises that essentially put my sciatic nerve onto some tension. Never really had any issue that day, but woke up the next day with kind of raging sciatica. And it was that like zap you straight down the leg, stop you in your tracks. Getting in and out of bed was just near impossible. Waking up at night, all that. I don't know exactly how far into it I was, somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks in. I woke up and my calf felt extremely tight, and I couldn't push off of it. I essentially had heel drop. If I was non-weight bearing, I could still flex it. So like I could go into a kneeling position and then like kind of lift my heel off the ground. But if I was standing, like I would sit there and I'd try to get on my toe, and I could not do it. Like I couldn't push off of it. I was like limping around with every step because my ankle was just giving out on me. And at that point, I was like, well, crap, this is serious. This is beyond just pain, which also sucked. But I, at that point, got an MRI. I had a extremely large extrusion on a paracentral extrusion on the right side. The picture that's up on Twitter if anybody wants to see it. And I had a consult with a surgeon here in Daytona, and the surgeon essentially told me they could help with the pain, but they didn't know if the calf was going to come back. So, and it took, so from getting the heel, like recognizing that I was having heel drop, it took me about 2 to 3 weeks before I could get an MRI. It took about another 6 weeks from there to get the consultation with the surgeon. And so in that time frame, I was just doing everything I could to see if I could, work this calf, get it back, and I don't know how much my actual involvement in that did anything. But as I came up to the point where I was consulting with the surgeon, I just started to get some glimmers that it might be coming back. And that was like me standing in my kitchen, going up on my toes and just trying to walk without my heel dropping. And I was like, oh, there was like a pause there before it flipped off and I fell to the ground. So I had that kind of in the back of my head. And after kind of consulting with the surgeon, him saying, we don't know if we can get the calf back at all anyway, I decided to try a round of epidural injections first. And so got referred to pain management. The calf did end up coming back completely. I'm thankful to say, got that back, and then just had rehab the strength back up from there, and ended up having 2 injections. I may have already had the first one when we had the first podcast. I don't remember. But the first injection helped me tremendously. So rewinding from that point just a little bit, the first 3 months, tons of shooting, like the shooting sharp stabbing pain. Right. The second 3 months, which I think that's where we probably talked, was about 6 months in, was much worse. Like it was just this like unpleasant, it was like squeezing, grabbing pain. I could only be on my feet for about 15 minutes at a time, before it was just like my whole leg was throbbing and it felt like it was in a vice and I just couldn't be up. I had to go lay down. And so I had to kind of figure out how I was pacing out a lot of my daily activities. I was still trying to see patients at that point. So I was like driving an hour to my office, which wasn't very fun. And that was whenever I got the first injection. And that essentially helped take away a lot of those sensations that I was having, to where I could be on my feet for enough time that I could live my life. I ended up having a second one, which I don't feel really helped me too much more. But that may be because the first one helped me so much. And so after the second one didn't help me a ton, I forgoed the third one, and I've just kind of been managing it on my own since then.
And that's pretty much how that last episode ended, where you were at that point. So now it's been almost 2 years since the initial event, right?
Mm-hmm.
Close to it. Since starting, or maybe since that last conversation, so about 18 months, what all has changed?
I would say, there's good and bad. I've definitely gotten better overall than where I was even after I got the first injection. And since we last talked, I would say that for the most part, I can live my life fairly normally right now. I still struggle in 2 main areas, and that is that I still can't bend very well. So hip hinging or just trying to bend down, touch my toes, it's really rough. If I spend a good amount of time stretching my hamstrings out prior, it seems like everything just loosens up, and then all of a sudden, like I'll hinge with the best of them. But it'll essentially re-stiffen on me with maybe 5-6 minutes. And so I'll find myself kind of in these cycles of like, stretch it out, then I can do anything I need to do bending wise. But as I find ways to get around my day where it's just, I just bend my knees more and don't bend at the hips as much. And the second thing is sitting. Like I can't sit to save my life. And that's probably the most annoying thing that is still kind of persisting, because like a big part of my job is sitting at a computer, whether that's doing like my own telehealth calls with my patients or sitting at the college and stuff like that, working on the computers there. So um, I can sit for maybe 10 minutes before I get a nice pain in my right hip that will then just kind of gradually kind of creep up and get more intense. And so I'll kind of have to stand it up and walk it out. And that'll take, depending on how long I was sitting, it'll take a certain amount of time for it to kind of chill itself out and get back down to normal. Um, but as long as I'm kind of up and moving or standing, I feel dang near normal, which is, I'm very happy for, because I know a lot of people don't get there.
And over the past 18 months, have you done any tests on yourself, whether it's like a heel raise test or things with training that you've tracked over time just to see if there's an objective improvement?
Yeah, so it's hard to say what kind of a, I would say the main thing I've looked for is mostly just like how far can I bend? That's my big objective marker. I try to track how long can I sit. That's another thing functionally for me. Um, I used to look at time on my feet, but as that became not so much of an issue, I kind of quit looking at it. And then my just training wise, in terms I knew kind of what my provocative movements were, which tended to be squatting, deadlifting. And so, I wrote a very structured program with that and gradually kind of brought those numbers up, and was able to hit some 1 RMs maybe 6 months ago, with no real issue, no real repercussions to that, versus prior when I was rehabbing it, I would definitely get some flares, and I had to scale those things quite a bit. And we can go into discussion on what that kind of looked like if you want to. But yeah, I lay on my back and I'll just kind of like do a straight leg raise, or just bring my hip up to 90 and see how far I can extend my knee, and try and see where is this at. I'm not busting out a goniometer or anything like that. But I just kind of subjectively look at it and see if it feels like it's further along than it used to be. And it is further along than where it was, because I used to be able to just break 90 degrees of knee extension, if my hip was up at 90. And now I can get to 135. So it's doing okay.
Yeah, do you want to chat about some of those training flares and how you've managed some of those?
Yeah. So I kind of follow the classic rules in rehab of managing pain in rehab. It needs to stay tolerable in the moment. It needs to not be escalating, and it needs to not leave you, worse off later in the day or next day. Make sure that you're not trending in the wrong direction. And so, one of the things that I was doing pretty consistently was block pulls, because I couldn't get all the way down to the ground hinge wise. So I would elevate the bar up and do some block pulls there. And I would get to the point that, I build up the weight enough and I'd be okay. I'd be going okay, going okay, going okay. And then I would be kind of fine in the moment. Maybe I wasn't, just because I'm hard headed and I want to push some stuff. But I was noticing a lot more like those. It was getting more sensitive later in the day, to where it would just be achier throughout the day. Or one of the symptoms I get is I get just like an achiness around my knee and through my like tib anterior and outer shin. So those kind of are signs of my sensitivity. They're just I'll be laying in rest or something, and they hit me. So when I was doing exercises that would definitely lead to those sorts of flares, I would then have to, scale the weight back, or, bring the range of motion up a little bit. And I'm pretty aggressive when I scale back. I'm like, cool, I'm just going to cut load by 20%, 25%, 30% if I need to. And then and then I'll, take a day to just kind of test it out and build from there. So throughout probably the last 18 months, that's probably been the main thing that I've had to work with. Squats and I have been much more agreeable. I used to have to squat straight to a box and not go too low, but I managed to kind of get full unrestricted depth with those and didn't really have to scale too many things there. But the deadlifts and hinges and stuff have definitely been a little bit more hit or miss over, I would, maybe not in the last 6 months, but in the year prior.
Have you noticed any sort of persisting issues with strength of your hamstrings in a more direct knee flexion fashion?
Yeah, so going back to some of the objective measures, I have a hamstring curl machine and a leg extension machine here. So I will maybe every other training cycle, which might be 8 to 12 weeks long, I'll integrate single leg curls in instead of double leg, just to make sure that I'm not allowing the good side to do all the work. And I would say that for the most part, it's pretty even, but I think last time I checked, I had about 90% on the involved side.
With the conditioning related symptoms, have you been able to tolerate forms of conditioning besides, I would assume, biking or seated positions are probably pretty irritable because of the seating, but what over the past 18 months have you been able to do from kind of an aerobic development standpoint?
Yeah. So biking was walking was kind of the only thing I could do there for a while. Unless you want to count BFR as conditioning, which I did for a good amount of time. But so I have a air bike, a rower, and a treadmill here at the house. And when the rower was definitely the biggest no-go, just because seated and you get to that extended position, the legs out, that kind of long sitting position, that wasn't fun. So I was on the bike quite a bit. The jogging, for when it was more sensitive, and this has probably been, let's say, from when we talked to a year later, so last November. Anytime I would do any sort of jogging or hopping, that sort of movement, it literally felt like somebody was taking that nerve and just literally shaking it inside of me. Like it was so painful to have any sort of that kind of ballistic movement on it. So I didn't do any sort of jogging at all. So I was on the bike quite a bit, but doing more intervals where I could hop on, hit some high intensity, and then get off and make sure I wasn't in that seated position for too long. I eventually hopped on the rower, and I think I have a video of this up somewhere on my socials, of me on the rower, but I took my right leg off and I was just having it bent off on the side so that knee would stay bent. And that let me get on the rower for a while. Eventually I was able to kind of put the leg back up on the rower, but just kind of, again, shortening that range. And then just over time, as things have gradually improved, I started being able to jog a little bit on the treadmill. And that's been the thing I've probably done the most over the past 6 months. Was I started at about I had started about 2,000 meters on the treadmill. And then every week I would increase it by 100 meters at a time. And I kind of wave load that over time, where I'd drop back down, build back up a little bit higher. And I got that up to being able to pretty much do close to 4,000 or 5,000 meters with no issue. So I would say I'm pretty in the clear from an aerobic standpoint, in terms of anything that I want to do. I'm sure I could find things that would bother it if I wanted to kind of push that point.
Let's go into the most recent MRI that you got.
Okay.
I think it was the 2-year MRI.
Yeah. So I'll start with my reasoning for the MRI. Me being a bonehead, decided I'm frustrated and I'm tired of not being able to bend. So I'm going to get real aggressive with my stretching. Don't do that. I found out. So I stretched a little too aggressively and it flared up real nice. And to the point that I was actually getting back pain, which a little bit on my backstory, I've dealt with chronic back pain since I was 20 years old. And when this disc herniation happened, I haven't had a lick of back pain since the moment the sciatica started. Like none. And when I started, like, I kind of stretched this thing real aggressively, I was not only would it get nice and flared in the leg, but like I was getting a lot of like tailbone L5S1 area pain, which for reference, my herniation's at L5S1. So I was like, well, damn it, what the heck, man? Come on, like this is really starting to make me upset. So I wanted to go and get another MRI, see what it looked like. I knew kind of my probabilities, being that it was an extrusion, that it was smaller. But I was kind of in a mindset at that point where I was like, I was real frustrated with them. Like, if this thing's still here, I'm calling the surgeon. And so I got the MRI, and it pretty much shows that it's completely resolved. Like, it is. Maybe I'll shoot you guys the pictures for we can put them up on socials or something, the comparisons. But like in the first one, you can kind of see that disc on that right side was like, it was touching the backside of my spinal canal. And now it's pretty much just a disc bulge at this point. So, the probabilities kind of worked in my favor. I would say I have a little less disc height than I did prior. And there's definitely still a bulge there, but it's not nearly as severe as it was.
If that wasn't the case, it sounds like you would have gone and consulted with the neurosurgeon again.
Yeah, for sure. And I still might, to be honest with you. I my thought is, like, I have dove into the literature on this stuff. I knew kind of what the probabilities were with a extrusion. I'm going to be in that kind of that 70% ish of those are going to at least get smaller over time. And so I expected that to happen, but I also know that most of that reduction is probably going to happen over the first year. And so now, being 2 years out, I don't know how much more reduction I can really expect. And the only reason I'm still, even thinking about that is that my symptoms still seem very mechanical, in terms of, I only really feel pain when I put the nerve on tension, or when I'm sitting. And to this day, ibuprofen still will pretty much take all my pain away. Like, if I take ibuprofen, I can sit for an entire 5-hour shift at work with no issue. But if I don't, I get 10 minutes. And so I feel like there's probably still, like, my mind goes to, there's probably still something happening there locally. And I'd still be open to hearing what the surgeon has to say, in terms of if they think that there's something there they could do, or if they think that, another round of injections or something would be useful. But yeah, I think at this point, I don't know what more I'm going to do other than what I've already done, or if it just needs more time.
Yeah, if you were to be at this state you're at right now for 5, 10 plus more years, if you were to know that, would the next steps be a stronger consideration? Or would you be okay with this current state?
No, I'd probably consider the next steps more. And that's more so not, it's more so just like, when it flares up, it flares up good on me. I can't sit in a car like that. That's like, you don't realize how much just like sitting at a desk is something that, you want to be able to do. Like, I want to be able to sit in my office and just do work and not have to think about it. I think that I probably, if I knew that I was going to have to deal with, these little flares, or where I'm going to wake up out of bed like I did this morning, and it was just really sore and achy, and, feeling like my knee wants to give out on me every now and then. I'm like, yeah, I'd probably consider that. I don't want to deal with that for 5 to 10 more years if there's an option to kind of, take that away. That said, if I talk to people and they're like, we don't think that there's a whole lot here, I'll deal with it. I'll make my modifications. I'll figure out how to kind of move on, because I've done that, and I can continue to do that too.
Do you know, you had mentioned earlier that first injection you received had pretty substantial benefits, and then you had the second, which was relatively little change, and then you opted out for the third. Are you familiar with the research of, now that you've had this prolonged period of time off, is there a better chance of another significant benefit with
That I
another?
don't know. That's definitely something I'd have to look into before, and I would probably look into that before kind of going that route. But I haven't really explored the areas of the research, and the research is, much slimmer on multi-year out from a disc herniation. Um, or it tends to focus much more what happens in that first year. So if there's something out there, I will find it. But if, but right now I don't know.
And do you have an idea of what surgery options, or what surgery in particular, they would perform?
Yeah, probably a microdiscectomy. That's probably going to be, that's the standard go-to. Now, given that it's more of a bulge at this point, maybe they would have a different opinion. But that's where my assumption would be, that usually they'll do a microdiscectomy with a partial laminectomy.
And then on that end, do you know what that rehab and timeline would look like? Or is that, again, not?
No, so I looked more into that when I was considering it. You're on some heavy pain meds typically for the first week. You can typically get back to work once you're off of those, because you can start to drive. You do need to limit your periods of sitting, bending, that sort of thing for 6 to 8 weeks or so, just to kind of minimize risk of reherniations. And after that, once things have healed up, just gradual graded exposure. Try and get some range of motion back. Gradually build up the stress on it again, which I'm ready to do that process if that's what I need to do.
So, what would it take for you to consider that at this point?
Probably not much, to be honest with you. It would probably only take the surgeon saying, "Yeah, I've seen people come in with an MRI that looks like this and walk out feeling much better." Like, that's probably all it would honestly take, because it's one of those things, like, having dealt with chronic pain in the past, this is a different level of chronic pain, I'd say. My previous experiences with, say, my back pain it hasn't been 24/7 or every day. It's more that periodic, episodic sort of pain, where you wake up with a backache a lot of days, but some days it's a lot worse, and you go through weeks where where it kind of flares. But then there's weeks where, like, I feel totally 100% normal, and I figured out how to deal with that. This is different in that I have been in pain every single day for 2 years, like, and multiple times a day, um, multiple hours each time. It's exhausting, really. So while it is under control, and, like, I'm very grateful for that, if there's something if there's that step out there that feels like it could take it, one step further, to not where it's like I don't ever experience pain in my hip or leg again, but like that I can get it to a point where I need to push it to make that happen, then I think I'd want to explore that option. Because right now the limitation seems to be that like it doesn't take me pushing it to irritate it. It's just happening with normal everyday stuff, which makes it feel a little less out of my control.
I think Mark had potentially asked you in that initial episode if you had sought out other providers' opinions, and you said you had pretty much self-managed and had a conversation with your wife as well, and I think she performed an exam initially. Have you since then had any major interactions or discussions with other providers about trialing certain options?
Mostly just the other providers at the college that where I work. I've talked about the situation and whatnot. But I haven't talked to anyone outside of, the pain management doctor and the surgeon that I initially consulted with on it. It's just been, from there, it's more people in my circle and then, again, more self-management.
The individuals at the university, was there any input or ideas that they had that was pretty different or novel than what you had already thought about?
Not necessarily. Um, I don't. I think from from the conservative route, there's only so many things we have to offer, right? Being at a chiropractic college, like there's some that say, oh, you should maybe try flexion distraction, or you should try the decompression machine and whatnot. I mean, I guess I'd be open to giving it a shot, but like I don't feel like I have a ton of confidence in it, especially at this point.
So you haven't even tried any of those options?
No, not really.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I would be curious to hear. Yeah, I've seen a good handful of patients with sciatic presentations actually find that be more symptomatic or like increase their symptoms. So
I've seen that as
there's,
well a couple times.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I think it's one of those things you gotta just ease into it and see how it feels. And I know what I'm looking for in terms of symptom reduction too. It's like I need to see things that help me bend better and sit better. Um, I'm I can go and because that's the frustrating part. I can walk out to my gym right now and I can go deadlift 350 pounds. But I can't. And I went and I did a 20-minute run last Tuesday. And I was fine. And then I sat on the bench for 5 minutes to just catch my breath, and I stood up and it was hurting. So it's like I know what I'm looking for necessarily in terms of progress, and it'd probably be smart to say, hey, it's not gonna hurt necessarily to try out a few weeks of those things to see if they do anything. What they're at least not probably going to make it worse necessarily, as long as we're not stupid with the prescription of it. But but I would say my confidence in it isn't super high.
Has your interaction with patients over this period changed at all? Have you, as you said, you've had chronic pain experiences in the past, but this is much more intense. Has that changed your discussions or interactions with patients in one way or another?
I'd say I'm more empathetic now, for sure. I think I'm much more aware of how pain impacts psychology more. And like when I pain was very high in the kind of those, let's say months 3 to 6, like I was down, I felt depressed, I was angry a lot, like I was short tempered a lot. And it's just that was a product of the environment that I was in, and not like the environment of like my house and whatnot, but just like my life at that point. So we know how like psychosocial variables, they impact the pain experience and whatnot, but like the pain experience also impacts those, and we get caught in this really nasty, vicious loop. And I think that's not something new for me to understand, but I think I have a deeper understanding of it now, having personal experience with it. Um, and I think I'm also much more, find a way to word this. I'm much more aware of how pain impacts the psychology more so, and like sometimes the thing people need is they just need less pain, and then everything else is just going to fall into place in their life. Not everybody who is struggling mentally is, needs a psychological intervention. They just need less pain. And for me, like that's what I needed. Once I had less pain, like I was good. I was able to just get back to life. Um, and so I think I'm more aware there. I'm also, I'd say, much more okay with telling someone I don't know how long this is going to take. Like my mantra through this whole thing, it has been, as long as it's getting better, there's nothing to say that it won't keep getting better. You don't know what that timeline is going to look like, but as long as you are seeing some sort of inch forward in progress, there's nothing to say it won't keep inching forward. And I try, I think, to relay that to patients now too, because people want to know, how long do you think this is going to be? How long am I going to have to deal with this? And I try to be very open and honest with that conversation of, this could be, you could be done with this next week, or that, there is a chance that this takes longer, and I can't predict the future and I can't tell you what that's going to look like, but this is what we want to do. And this is what we want to be looking for to see how you're moving forward. So it's definitely impact those conversations, in that way.
The sometimes like overly simplified idea of graded exposure, that idea for you of, well, could you just slowly improve like your tolerance to sitting by like exposing yourself to it? That doesn't seem to be the case. Have you rethought some of the like ideas of this just needs to be ramped up over time, where it's just potentially not possible in certain situations?
Yeah. All right. So this is something I think that in my mind that probably has changed a little bit more. I don't know how much the graded exposure actually drives the recovery. I think the recovery probably drives the graded exposure. And to explain on that is, we'll step out of this situation. If I have you start by pressing an empty barbell, and then 6 weeks later you're pressing 150 pounds, did your pain get better because you gradually exposed your way from the bar to the 150, or were you able to increase the load because your body was recovering? Right. And so I have started to look much more at rehab as more of calibrating yourself to where your body's recovery really is, and trying to keep stress within your current abilities. And you increase and change that load as your body allows that to happen. Not so much that like that has to happen at a certain pace for you to move forward. I think it's more of a product of it.
So, in that process of progressive exposure based upon recovery, is the assumption then that recovery occurs without or in the absence of stress still? Or is stress in certain situations still a necessity to drive the recovery?
Yeah, see that I don't know. I think that if you don't, let's just say you don't do anything, right? Like you don't try and stress it at all. Um, if pain and symptoms can probably still go down with that as well. And we probably, I see that a lot. We see people that they stopped doing something and they felt better, but they felt worse once they started doing it again. I think that aspect, that latter aspect, is where the grade exposure probably has its best effect. It's more of a reconditioning process, or maybe even maintaining conditioning, so that the likelihood of flaring back up whenever you try to re-expose later on, that probability might be lower. So I think we could probably take it two ways. You can pull stress down to a level that it's okay, that's tolerable, and then gradually re-expose up through the process of your recovery. Or you could probably stop completely and go cold turkey for however long you need to. But then you still have to figure out where your baseline is coming back from that, because, just basic S&C principles, deconditioning, whatnot. And then you probably have to go through the graded exposure that way, just to rebuild up your body, just build up your body's tolerance off of whatever that baseline looks like. So I think it happens either way. It's just a matter of when does it happen. I just don't know that it actually creates the recovery of the injury necessarily. It probably helps you get to a higher level of function that, to whatever that looks like from a desired, that patient's desired standpoint.
Yeah, and it might be dependent as well on the type of injury and what are the driving factors.
Sure.
Where in the case of persistent pain, where we maybe don't have as much of a specific tissue relevance, or it's less of a nerve input, it might be more relevant to have that progressive exposure, because in something like an ACLR patient, it might be more important because they might need that continual exposure to encourage the bone to heal appropriately, to get the quad index addressed, things that might not be addressed fully if it's just take 3 months off and then start to build back up. Like that bone may not actually heal fully or as strongly to then be able to take the return back to sports at 6 to 9 months.
Sure. Yeah. And in that sense, maybe the bone needs it and whatnot. It needs that stress to kind of keep that healing process moving in the right direction. But and the quad would definitely, not recover its strength for sure without some form of training. The where I try to challenge my thought process on that is, which, not that I would actually do this, but what happens, if we just let, it's not going to, is it going to stop the graft from healing or whatnot? The knee heals and now you just have a weak quad, and because you didn't do anything, sending you back to sport at this point is stupid, right? Like that's just dumb. So now you have to do that rehab process. Now you still need to build that up. What would be interesting is, can you build it back up to its full capacity now that you're so many months removed of it not having it? Is it harder to do that, or is there some sort of new barrier that you just can't seem to get it? Versus if you went through the process as it was healing, something snaps back a lot easier, and you're able to kind of reach a higher peak than you would had you waited and delayed that process. That I just don't know. Yeah,
I don't think anybody knows, because I think
yeah, I
that's a
don't.
hard sell.
And I wouldn't do, and I wouldn't do
some...
that. Like I definitely wouldn't do that. I'm still very much in favor of gradual exposure and gradual reconditioning. I would recommend everyone do that. Like that's what I'm doing. It's just, these are the thoughts that go through my head as to what is it doing? How is it working? Am I in the driver's seat or am I in the passenger seat of this rehab process? And that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective.
It reminds me, I know the barbell medicine crew has talked a lot about rethinking the idea of progressive overload. and thinking of it as like progressive loading, where just because you add 5 pounds onto the bar and it's become heavier doesn't mean you've actually adapted. It's
Right.
just you may have gone from like an RPE 8 to an RPE 9, and you can't force that development of strength just by adding load. And it's
Right.
similar to like you can't force the tolerance to prolonged sitting just if you go from 5 minutes at barely hanging on to like 7 minutes
Right.
barely hanging on, and now you're flared up for 2 weeks. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, yeah, you did 2 extra minutes, but have you actually changed your tolerance to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've seen them talk about that. I think Brian Miner's talked about this in terms of the progressive overload in the bodybuilding realm, around that concept of if you raise the weight 5 pounds, but you're just going up in RPE, that's not really adaptation, right? That the adaptation occurs, and that's what allows you then need to increase the weight 5 pounds to maintain the same stress level as what you were looking for, right? Because now because you've adapted, if you were to keep the weight the same, you would go from an RP 8 to an RP 7. So now you need to increase the weight to maintain the RP 8. Yeah, I think Eric Mura has talked about that with quad index and stuff too, with getting the quad back. Does the quad, does the quad come back because of your loading, or do you increase the loading because the quad's coming back? I think he might have a blog. I think he might have a blog article on his site, um, with something of that degree.
Yeah, he said something similar in one of his courses I went to 8 or 9 months ago, where it was almost similar of like, I'm just kind of watching and seeing what happens as they naturally progress, and I'm giving them what they can handle. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, it's the person's like own process that is driving this. And
Right.
it is weird to think about that. Like, you still have to have these like constraints and barriers, and you need to figure out what the appropriate load and volume and intensities are, but how much of it is you forcing it versus the person's just readiness at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's an argument for us, having more of a consultant role. Like, we have, like, helping people with decision making is maybe that's our greatest asset. Helping people navigate the process might be our greatest asset. Um, where sometimes it's hard to subjectively look at things, and coaches need coaches, as the saying goes. Sometimes you need somebody to come in and take an objective look at things and say, this is what you need to do, and take yourself out of it and keep that process rolling with the right constraints. And so, our role as kind of the consultant in that point to help set those constraints is extremely valuable, even if we aren't the ones driving what those constraints get to be.
Has your now that you've or currently rethinking this idea, has your explanation to patients evolved over the past few years of we just need to gradually expose you to these things? Was that your kind of prior explanation, and has that changed of just what do you say?
Yeah, so I mean, I still frame everything in kind of that similar. Yeah, we need to gradually build you up from where you are. Um, I think I'm just a little bit more. I probably integrate more of an idea of, we're going to increase this as your body lets us increase this. Right, we're going to increase that stress as your body allows it. Um, and that comes back to putting checkpoints in place. I use the analogy of downhill skiing. You got to go through one gate before you get to the next gate. Um, so if we can figure out where your baseline is today, I'm going to provide a stressor to you, and if you check all these boxes, we can say that you're tolerating that. We can then test to see what the next exposure looks like. But we don't know what the outcome of that is going to be. Just because you tolerated this one doesn't mean you're going to tolerate the next. But that is where, kind of coming back to kind of that old model of just, progressively add stuff. We don't necessarily have an RPE rating for pain necessarily. Like that doesn't work quite as well. So where do you make that? Do you need to tell people that they need to go from having a 3 out of 10 to a 1 out of 10 before you increase? I don't think the literature really backs that up necessarily either. Because we've seen people can be pain free or push into pain and they kind of recover the same. So I do think from a more of a process standpoint, we do need to kind of test that next increment as long as it's logical, but we can't necessarily predict what the outcome of that's going to be. We're just looking to see, we're kind of just increasing what our probability is of what the outcome is going to be. If you tolerated this, is 5 more pounds that likely to break you? I don't think so. So let's test that next exposure, see how you respond to that. And if you check all the boxes again, we get to pass it. We get to call that a pass, and we get to test the next exposure. But if you feel like you're kind of on the edge, and that's like you were saying with sitting, if you're sitting for 5 minutes and it's already kind of feels like you're getting pretty irritated with it, but you can tolerate it, I don't know that I would necessarily go straight to adding 2 more. I might hang there at that level until you say, you know what, I'm tolerating that. It's not really leaving me feeling too achy afterwards. I feel confident to add those 2 minutes, and I feel like I'm subjectively ready for that. Then we add the 2 minutes and we see what happens. But if you already feel like you're tolerating, but you're on the edge, I'd probably just hang right there at that level and see what happens.
Any other big reflections or thoughts over these past 2 years and or moving forward where your head is at with patient interactions, rethinking certain things there, or with your own recovery?
Yeah, I probably got most of it out. I think I'm just at this point I'm just much more okay with the fact that I probably know a lot less about what this is going to look like than what I would like to. This whole rehab process is a lot of trial and error, probably more trial and error than we would like to admit. And that's okay. Like that, like it's okay to kind of wade into the unknown, but your patient, my patients, they're coming to us because they've exhausted kind of their resources for managing. And I look at my job as to help provide them with more resources to manage, whether that's education, whether that's clarity, whether that is a rehab program, whatever that looks like. I think most people don't seek out care just because they hurt. I think they seek out care because they hurt and they don't know what to do with it anymore. And so having us kind of take on that role of being able to increase whatever, provide them with more resources to manage, even if that's just support, I think that's wholly important. And I think that's just as valuable as anything hands-on or anything else that we might do.
I think that's a great place to stop, unless, Sam, you have any other final questions or thoughts?
No, it's just been delightful catching up with Jacob.
It has.
Nice to see you guys.
You as well. Thanks again.
Thank you.